Thank you so much, Craig. My name is Paul Nagy, along with Clair Blacketer. We lead the Evidence Working Group. We're really excited to come to you today and present to you our work on how to get started with building, being part of our evidence network within OHDSI. We're going to be talking about how to go through the steps for this from a technical perspective, as well as giving you some background on how to engage the governance within your organization as well, to be able to have permission to do this. And Claire's going to wrap up by giving a demo of how to join the network as well. So I wanted to start by, one of the motivations that Claire and I have been working on for the past year is we really, as an OHDSI community, we want to accelerate the number of network studies that are going on. We want to improve the quality of the network studies. And as Patrick mentions, we also want to improve the speed with which they take place. So we want to see network studies that have more data partners, have richer data, and also can be done in a faster way. So we have been looking for ways that we can help catalyze these activities. And we already, as a community, have been working on many ways to improve how we conduct evidence network research across our community. We have done a lot for data partners, as you saw earlier this year, with the Themis working group on the best practices for how to enrich your OMOP in consistent ways so that we can conduct network research. We have seen a lot of work over the last couple of years with the strategic framework to actually lower the technical costs of running network studies. And we've even seen efforts where we're now posting, thanks to Tufts, shared funding opportunities for how to build sustainable models for our data partners to be able to participate in our data networks. And likewise, we've also been building out working groups and services for network researchers to help them validate their cohorts and their phenotypes, for helping them we have a protocol repository on GitHub for helping them understand how to structure and do study design. And we've even done our SOS challenges, and we do for helping people train how to do a distributed network study across the OHDSI network. And so we're really still trying to increase that cross-section of interaction and catalyze the network studies that are being done on OHDSI. So we're excited to try to we're adding in new services to really directly connect data partners and network studies. We still find it's hard as a network study researcher to find data partners that are going to be a fit for use for your data. And as data partners, it can be hard to find network researchers that are ready to be able to work with their data. And so the first thing we're going to be talking about, the main thing we'll talk about today, is how we're building a database profile repository. This is not the raw data. This is the profile of the data of many institutions that participate in our data network, where we can now provide services for network researchers to see if there's a fit for use of their data. And we can also, with that, provide benchmarking back to those data partners. The other thing we're excited that we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be launching office hours and recruitment services, really trying to help glue this community together to help data partners find network researchers and help network researchers find data partners. So we are going to be trying to build out more services to help us conduct more network studies. And so this is our goal, is to make them to more often happen, as well as helping us improve the speed with which we conduct network study as well. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Claire for talking about our next steps.
Yeah, so thank you. And as you noticed, Paul is really showcasing how we are viewing this OHDSI Evidence Network as this communication, this bringing together of network researchers and what we're calling data partner organizations. So today we're really focusing on what we're calling these DPOs, because I believe that we need to start somewhere with our evidence network, and where we are starting is in that recruitment of institutions that own or license data that has been converted to the OMOP Common Data Model version 5.3 or higher, that have a willingness to generate evidence and participate in network studies. Because once we have a really great baseline of data partner organizations and we understand the types of research that we can conduct across this federated network, then we can bring in our network researchers and really, as Paul was saying, catalyze that interaction. All right, next slide. So what I want to talk about today really is what does it mean to join the network as a data partner organization? Starting off, what you need to have in place, kind of what that general infrastructure should look like. Specifically, tangibly, what do you need to do to join the network? And then I wanted to go over quickly what information, as we talk about what you're going to be sending to us, what information is going to be held privately, so, behind the OHDSI Coordinating Center firewall, and then what information we will be making public. So we really want to go through all of this to hopefully entice you to join, to give you the tools to join, and hopefully also give you some of those tools to discuss your participation, with your, maybe with your health system or with your, your leadership teams or whoever you need to bring this to. So we're really excited to share all this information with you. And we will be sharing these slides. You're going to see they're pretty text heavy, but we did that so you could have a full resource of information and links at your disposal. Right, next slide. So the first thing I want to go through is what you need to have in place at your institution, at your organization to join the network. So as I mentioned before, you need to own or license data that is observational health data. So just to put that out there, I think we all know that, but just putting it out there, that has been standardized to the OMOP CDM version 5.3 or higher. That version is important because 5.3 plus, really 5.3 or 5.4 are the versions on which the standardized tools and methods work best. Your data needs to be held in a relational database, accessible by the organization. And this is where I'm saying we have some links in these slides for you as resources, but there's a list of the supported SQL environments that we've linked here. I think we've been doing a really good job. I know the Technical Advisory Board has really been working to expand the number of SQL environments that our tool stack supports. So just double check out there, but understand it is expanding ever rapidly as our community expands. So I'm going to talk about the fourth point, which was, if you can go back one, Paul. You need to be able to run the database diagnostic R package against your data, which goes with point 2. And then point 3 is a really important one that Ben's going to talk about much more in depth, which is you do need approval from your governance entity, or really approval according to your data use agreement if you license your data, in order to share the metadata and concept counts we're going to be talking about today, which is what we are describing when we talk about the database profile. So it is up to each individual organization to make sure that all appropriate governance requirements are followed based on what you need to do for your particular data and your organization. Okay, over to Ben to give us much more detail on this.
Thanks, Claire. Yes, so as Claire mentioned, it will depend on what type of organization you are as far as what your data governance board or committee or process will look like. At Johns Hopkins, we submit a formal application to an institution review board, and one of the things that has been helpful for our internal OHDSI ecosystem at Hopkins is to share experience and even direct IRB forms that we have submitted to help each other with that process. And the feedback that we've gotten has been helpful to hear from other projects that submit. It's maybe a different clinical outcome they're looking at, but it's still the process of using OMOP data. So some of that experience we've aggregated to share with you all here. And the first thing that we really get a lot of requests for more details, more information, can you explain that more clearly, is the concept of an OHDSI study or an OHDSI network study. So that's a word we will throw around a lot in the description of the work we're doing. And we forget sometimes that that may be a new concept and a new phrase to people. So the federated network analysis where the code travels but the data doesn't can't be explained in enough detail, or just to be very clear about that point is something that we've found it to be very important, and the IRB reviewers have asked us specifically to explain in more detail. At our institution, we have a IRB form that we use as a protocol document, and so we are not able to take the OHDSI protocol document and submit that in place of it. So we do add that as a supplemental document, but we do take some of the wording from that network study protocol and convert it to the Hopkins specific research protocol. And then another thing with when we're using secondary data, they want to know everywhere that the data will exist at any point in time. So describing the process of where the OMOP CDM database exists, specifying that that part is managed by our IT services is always something that they like to see, because it's they trust our institution's information technology team more than they do the researchers as far as maintaining the data security. But so the database server where the code will actually run and access the data. So we have a secure computing platform where we access the database, and then from then on where that data will move. So in this case, it will go from wherever your OMOP database is to where you run database diagnostics to the OHDSI coordinating center. So that's the process we described in this specific IRB protocol. And then the fourth one, at Hopkins, we have several instances of OMOP, all with varying degrees of de-identification. And the one we used in this project is what we refer to as the aggressively de-identified OMOP CDM. And that just, the difference there is, so de-identified has the dates shifted and truncated as a standard for OMOP CDM, with zip code censored to the first 3 digits. And then the aggressively de-identification is just the process of removing rare conditions and never events, concepts with less than 10 counts, which is also pretty standard in the OHDSI analytic software usually, and then the ARC never events removed. So the IRB really wants us to clearly define which instance of OMOP we're using. Just saying OMOP isn't good enough for us, at least. And so the specific protocol, next slide, Paul. The specific protocol that we submitted, which we would like to share, we will be sharing a generalized version for anyone who wants to use that to help get their IRB application started and submitted, and use some of the language that we used when we submitted our application. I just pulled a few key sections as an example out here in these slides. So the first thing they always ask is describe your project. And so I took language from Clair's protocol and changed a few things, but the key points is that this is aggregate statistics. These are just counts of things like number of people, number of measurements with no values, things like that. And later in the protocol, we also we're able to list every single result that we will be generating as from the DB diagnostics package. So it's nice to have that level of granularity in the protocol as well. But also pointing out that this is only touching the de-identified, aggressively de-identified OMOP data set. Next slide. With the methods, really specifying that no chart review will happen. Some of these things seem to be like in your head when you've thought about the project so much obvious, but it's important to be very explicit and to go into more detail probably than you think you need. More detail is appreciated by the IRB. So specifying that there will be no chart review at any point. This is only using secondary data, no new data will be generated. And again, pointing out that it's just summary statistics that we will be pulling from the OMOP database itself. And then next slide, Paul. So they also, of course, ask about how this data will be shared. And again, explicitly stating that we're not sharing any data, we're just sharing aggregate level counts, and talking about how those aggregate level counts will be kept by the OHDSI Coordinating Center for reuse to support network research. But it's really an emphasis on that this is secondary data, it's aggregate counts, we're not sharing any row level data, but explicitly describing that at each point at which they ask about the data in your respective IRB application. And again, we have a link that we are sharing the document that we submitted in full. So hopefully that helps you guys in your submission process with either your IRB or whatever your data governance process is for this project specifically.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. I know we've had some questions from some of our collaborators at different health systems, and so I really think what you've shared here, and of course we will be sharing this after the call, what you shared here is very, very helpful. So just to reiterate, what we are doing here in building out this OHDSI evidence network, we're specifically starting with our data partner organizations, because as I was saying before, we need a baseline of organizations who have data, who are ready to generate evidence in order to facilitate those relationships with researchers. To do that, we are asking data partner organizations to share these metadata and high-level concept counts about each data source that's being submitted to the network. And so what Ben is talking about here is a protocol in order to facilitate IRB approvals, we did create our protocol as well for this work. So I'm putting the form in the chat if you wanted a copy of that protocol. We will be writing a paper based off of what we have in the protocol. So we will be doing that once we get to a point where we have a really nice baseline of data partner organizations in the network that we know and we anticipate the network will continue to grow. But we are hopeful that by producing a protocol that clearly specifies what it is we're trying to do as a global community, this will help in getting that governance approval from your institution, your IRB or your governance board. So what we want to do is we want to ask that, as a data owner or licensee, you generate these high-level concept counts using the data diagnostics package. I have links in here just to describe what information is going to be gathered. It's also listed in the protocol. And so to join the network very tangibly, you just need to run this package, generate this information, and send it to the OHDSI Coordinating Center. We have an SFTP site that you can send to very securely. I have had some questions from early adopters and early joiners who are asking if they can send it by email. You can do that, but it's really up to your governance approval and what is the most secure way that you would like to share this information. When you run this data diagnostics function in order to generate this profile, which is the metadata and concept counts, ideally it should not be very taxing for you. It is based off of the Achilles package. Really what that means is it's just pulling previously run concept counts if your organization uses the Achilles package. So mine does, for example. So many of the values that we are generating in data diagnostics may already exist in your organization if you utilize the Achilles package for characterization. If that's so, it will take approximately 15 to 30 minutes, depending on your environment. The demo we're going to do today is actually much shorter, but part of that is just because the demo data I have is very small. If you haven't used the Achilles package before, or if the results were not stored, then this step could take approximately 1 to 8 hours, just depending on your environment and the size of your database. So just to want to level set kind of where we are here. Again, if you remember, I was saying you need to have the ability to run an R package against your data source that you'd like to submit to the network. And these are the steps required. Andy, I see you have a question. Do you want to quick come off mute and just elaborate a little bit while we're here on this topic?
Yeah, no, I was just, as I was trying to review some of the protocols and so on, it asks to register as someone interested in it in the evidence network. And then it asks for, do you have data that you're doing? And so you can't, if you don't have data now, or if you're a collaborator, you can't. I just wondered if there was some other way to get access to it without registering as a data provider.
Sure. Just honestly, I'm using that form just to make sure I know who is expressing interest so I can follow up. I was concerned that I would put the protocol into the ether and I wouldn't know who was interested and who to follow up with. So if you put your email address, I'll know who you are, because it's just
Fine.
myself and Jody and looking at it.
Okay, just to be clear.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, great question. All right. Next slide, Paul. All right, so before we go into the demo, I wanted to very clearly describe what we're talking about here when we talk about information that's going to be held privately and information that's going to be held publicly. So when you generate this metadata information and concept counts, this is exactly what it's going to look like. So I put a screenshot out of my own demo data. And what you see here is the CDM source name, so the name of the data source that you are submitting as a data source in the OHDSI evidence network. I have a statistic here just to make it clear. This is actually a coded value, but in this case, this is the number of persons with at least one condition occurrence by the condition concept ID. Then you see the concept ID there, and then you see the person count. In this case, and I will show you these options as we go through it, in this case, I have rounded the result to the nearest 10, so it will not show anything below 10, and you can see they're all, nice round whole numbers here. And I will show you how you can do that. So this specific information that has your data source name, the concepts, and the person count, that will be held securely at the OHDSI Coordinating Center and will not be shared as an open resource. All this site-specific information will be fully behind the Columbia firewall, and we will use that information to help us identify data sources that may be the best fit for network studies. And those analyses will be performed by the OHDSI Coordinating Center. So for example, we have the NAION study. If we had data sources in the network as we are describing, what Patrick and Cindy and the iCare and Vision group would do is they would come up with a set of high-level characteristics that they need to support their study. Someone at the coordinating center would take that list, run it against the OHDSI Evidence Network data sources. That would return a list of potential data sources that are fit for use. And then at that point, the coordinating center would have a conversation with the researcher and then tell them which data sources they should be reaching out to. Yeah, Scott, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. When you're saying they look at this to see which ones would be best, that's what you said first, and then you said fit for use.
Yeah.
Is there a filtering process to begin with, where you'd say, oh, there's 10 databases that might work, but we're going to focus on 3, either for workload or coordination or some simple reason? Is there a reason that you'd do 3 instead of all 10 that potentially have the diagnostics?
No, we would return all 10 to the researcher and allow them to discuss with the data owners or licensees. And then at that point, once the researcher is talking to the data partner organizations, then the OHDSI Coordinating Center would step out of the middle of that interaction. So we want to make it so that the researcher and the data partner organization are engaging in that relationship once they have been identified, and we will not be doing any kind of filtering or anything like that.
Thanks. And then in terms of the researcher, if the coordinating center is out, then the researcher takes on the responsibility of coordinating with all those. And it may be that she reaches out to 10 and only 6 of them are available, or there are some licensing or other things that would reduce the number, or the researcher says that she may only need. Is that kind of the process then that would go to the researcher, and then she would be responsible for interacting with the different partners and making arrangements, making sure there was, all the rest of the stuff that was needed?
That is correct. Yes. So very specifically, I think you're getting at a really good point that I have not iterated yet. By joining the OHDSI Evidence Network as a data partner organization, you are under no obligation to participate in network research at any time. But what you are agreeing to is saying, I am interested in network research, and I would be interested in researchers contacting me to join a study. You are under no obligation to do so, and I think, Scott, that's what you're describing there. So you were totally correct in your assessment there. That you may get 10 back that may be fit for use. Really, it's very high level criteria, like Patrick is saying here. Yeah, and then there may be some other, once you reach out to those 10 or so data partner organizations, there may be, like you were saying, some other governance issues, or maybe you don't have the resources at the time, or what have you, to really participate in that study.
Thank you.
All right, next slide. Yes, George.
Just to point out, because it's not in, it probably should be in the protocol, not just the information. The data will be held privately at the coordinating center. But we're warning you, the reason we want this, there's no PHI and no private business information, because while the intent is to keep it private, in the event of the breach, the agreement is that Columbia is not taking liability for the data being lost. So we just have to do that, because otherwise we can't carry out the study. So just to clarify on this slide, which says it will not be shared openly, it will not be shared openly purposely. But if there is a breach, the reason we're carrying this out. Now, if you accidentally send private information, either private patient information or private business information, then we will be deleting that information from our account. We'll be deleting it from our account to the extent possible. If something has happened before, there's nothing I can do. So we just have to make sure that the protocol states that also. I know you put it in another document, but it needs to go in this document so people know what they are getting into in case they need to report that back to their institution. But this is the whole reason why we, Columbia, are also always worried about this. And that's why we are taking out the never events, and why we're making sure that there are cell counts of 10 and so on.
Yeah.
But this won't be shared openly otherwise.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you, George. All right, let's see. Next slide, Paul. Just want to give an example of what will be shared publicly. So this is just an example. This is not exactly how this may look, but this is what we are describing when we say we will be aggregating the information to share publicly. We want to share aggregate concept counts and the total number of data sources with a record of each concept will be shared. So in this example, what I did was I took what I had previously, like data sources with or number of persons with at least one condition occurrence by condition concept ID, and I changed it to number of data sources. So you can see here now I still have concept IDs. I just have an aggregate total person count across all data sources. This is made up, by the way. And then you can see I have this number of data sources there. And it would be an example of how this might show up, just to get an idea as you start to put together your your building blocks that you need for a study, this could be your first resource, and it will be used in many other ways as well to support community efforts. But specifically for network research purposes, it can give you an immediate idea of which concepts are represented in the network. So this is really the only thing that we will be sharing as a public resource. All right, so from there, I do have a fun GIF if you want to go to the next slide. So we're going to run a database profile, and I am going to attempt a live demo. I've run it probably about 5 times this morning. And of course, we all know that's going to mean it's going to mess up immediately as I try to do the live demo in real time. All right, so I do have some code here. This is all available out on the Data Diagnostics GitHub, and I will be sharing that information and link after this call. And I have a little bit more information for us here. So the first thing you want to do as you are going to generate your concept counts and metadata, which we call a database profile, you want to install the package. Even if you've installed it before, I recommend you do so. I pushed a couple bug fixes, so thank you very much to a couple of folks who were trying it out. We're currently on version 1.5, so just make sure you have that version. All right, so the first thing you'll want to do is you just want to call the library. Very typical here. And then one thing I found really helpful to speed up the runtime is just this option that turns off the connection pane. Big thank you to Frank DeFalco, because he always pushes that, and he, of course, is right. So then the next thing you want to do is set up your connection details for how to connect to the database. In this case, I have a local Postgres Postgres database. So that's what you see here, but you would want to put in your own connection details for how to connect to your own database. If you're not sure how to do that, there's very detailed instructions on the database connector package. And when you install Data Diagnostics, it will install all of these packages if you do not already have them. So you don't need to worry about that, but there are detailed instructions in help and in GitHub for how to create your connection details. Okay. So from there, you're going to put in a couple sets of options for how you're going to run your database profile. So the first thing you want to do is put in your schema where the CDM data are. And then, as I was saying before, if you previously have run Achilles, which is the database characterization, you want to put in your results schema for where those results live, if you already have them. And then you also want to put your schema where your vocabulary tables are. Usually this is the same as your CDM, but we know that may not necessarily be the case. So you just want to put in where your vocabulary lives as well. The next thing you want to do is create a CDM source name. In this example, I'm putting in Cynthia V54 Odyssey example. So that's the name that's going to come up in all of my results files to identify the data source that I am running this on. You want to put in an output folder, so that's where all of this output will be written to. Very importantly, you do want to put in your CDM version. In this case, I am on CDM version 5.4, so I put in 5.4. Really, you should be on either 5.3 or 5.4, as we discussed earlier. This is an option. Essentially, what's going to happen as you run this profile, it's going to go through and look for a set of Achilles characterizations that it's going to pull out of your existing Achilles tables if you've run them before. If there are any it finds that the database profile requires, but they're missing because maybe you just didn't run them in your initial run of Achilles, it will essentially append those missing ones after it runs them to your existing Achilles instance. I put false here. I'm going to write them somewhere else. All of this is described in the help. If you're not sure, I would just put false. Just if you don't have write access, or if you're not sure that they exist, I would just put false here, and then create a schema where the database profile can write to if any are missing. Now, here are the ones I think are really important. So we were talking about rounding. You can round to the tens or hundreds place. In this case, I'm rounding to 10. You can round to 100 if you are concerned about low cell counts. And then, as you heard George and Paul both talking about, never events and certain things that they have excluded from their CDM, you could actually do that right in the database profile package here. So you can pass it a vector of concept IDs. So it'd really just be like 1, 2, 3, comma 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6. And those will be excluded from the output. So if there are certain things that you've been told you need to remove, you can put them here in the excluded concepts. And then you do have the option to run the DQD. I currently turn it off for now because I don't need to run it. It is up to you if you would like to. I would suggest here for this exercise to set it to false. The DQD is the data quality dashboard. It is a very helpful tool, but in this case, we are really only interested in some metadata and your high-level concept counts. So that's everything you need to include. As I said, I will have this code available for you. Yeah, Andy, we do have, so I know a couple folks have different lists, but we can definitely start to put something like that together. Andy was talking about a list of excluded concepts. I know we've kind of gone back and forth, but as part of our resources for the evidence network, that's some of the information we want to try to collate and share out as part of our group effort here. All right, so then the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to execute this function now that we've identified everything. The first thing that's going to happen is that's actually going to ask you a few questions to gather that metadata I was talking about. It's pretty high level. So the first thing it says is what's the name of the site or institution that licenses the data. I'm going to say blacketer.org because it's just me. One question is, has your site contributed to an OHDSI study in the past? I'm going to say yes. This is really just to help us gauge what resources you might need and the level of expertise you have at your site. Very similarly, this asks, is there someone at your site who can run and or debug an OHDSI study package? Same thing, we're just trying to understand the resources that you have at your site and the amount of help you might need in the beginning, because we all know network studies can be challenging. If you run the database profile before, you will see this is a new question. Is your site interested in participating in sponsored studies? We do know that there are sponsors who are interested in potentially learning from the OHDSI Evidence Network. So we just want to understand if you and your site are interested in those types of studies. All right, so then that was about your site. The next questions are about your database. So the first question is the full name. This is really so that we can fully identify all the databases all the data sources that are sent to us. So I'm calling it Cynthia, Synthetic Patient Generator. The next question is, does it have a nickname? Because we all know we have like these really long database names and we all call it like 3 letters or something. So I'm going to call it Cynthia. The next question is contact information. So what is the name of the person who should be contacted? I'm going to put myself and then their email addresses. So another point I want to make sure we make is that, again, this is the kind of information that will only be held at Columbia, that will never be shared publicly. The next question is about a digital object identifier. Does your database have one? Mine does not. And then there's some questions about governance. So how long does it typically take to receive approval to run a study? How long in weeks? I'm going to say 2 because I'm slow. And then it asks what type of data are present in your database. So it opens up a funky little box on my other screen, I'm going to say electronic health records because Cynthia emulates EHR data. How often are the data refreshed? I'm going to say quarterly, and then it'll start to run. And so once you generate, you answer those questions once, if you run the database profile again on the same data source and you have it pointing to the same output folder, it will not ask you those questions again. So it writes that data out once, and as long as you're running on the same data source, you only have to answer those questions once. So don't think you're going to have to do it every single time. All right, so now it's just going to run. While that goes, I did want to describe a couple different things related to what happens after you send us your database profile. So let's see. Pull this up. I'm just going to pull you guys on my other screen here so I can share a little bit of that. And once I share that information, our profile should be ready. Here. Okay, so after you send your database profile to the OHDSI Coordinating Center, what will happen is your organization will actually receive an OHDSI.org account. I'm using Scott here as an example. He is at the VA. The VA will receive something like va@OHDSI.org. This is for a couple different reasons. One is just to identify that this organization is now part of the OHDSI Evidence Network. If other people in the VA or who are using the Vinci data are curious, they can immediately go and say, oh, VA is already listed as a data partner organization. Great. And also, one nice thing is if you have an organizational account with OHDSI, then, if sometimes those individual collaborators might change, you have this one point of communication for everyone in the organization. The other nice thing is then in our OHDSI Teams environment, we can easily notify each organization of potential network studies and use it for internal communication. Number two, your organization will be listed as an OHDSI Evidence Network data partner organization on the OHDSI.org website. And then once there are enough participating data partner organizations, we'll begin to generate those reports. Like Patrick was sharing a couple weeks ago, putting your data source in the context of the network. Now, this is just 3 benefits that I'm highlighting. I know we've talked a lot about the value that the OHDSI Evidence Network can bring to your organization. I just wanted to very quickly share those key things that will happen as soon as you send your data profile to the coordinating center. All right, so one other thing I wanted to point out is we have built, we've opened up actually an organizational email of our own. In case you're not sure who to reach out to, we tried to make it very simple. If you have questions, you can email us at evidencenetwork@OHDSI.org. We did this similarly for why we want to create organizational emails for our DPOs, so that there are many people who can see and respond to questions as they come in, and it's not just myself or Paul. Oh, thank you, Peter. Okay, I was not aware of that. I was trying to be very clear between, so Peter's saying in Europe, DPO means data protection officer. I was trying to make it clear that there could be a partner organization who only has a researcher, but not data. So I was trying to be very clear that these are data partner organizations. So I will try to be clear in my language. Yeah, George?
Claire, can you clarify, because I wasn't sure from the slide, so everyone knows. When someone asks to run a study, for the feasibility of a study, will they learn the identity of the data partners who fulfill, or will it only be sent email to the data partner for them to reach out to the study coordinator?
That is a good question. We had initially intended that the researcher would get the organizational emails of those organizations that might qualify. Then that's one of the other reasons why we wanted to have those organizational emails. So we are not specifically sharing any individual person's contact information.
So I just want people, so I agree with that, and I just want people to be clear. So that's why we gathered the organizational email so that we didn't have to give out people's names, but we are giving out the organization name. So you'll submit a query, can my study run? And unless the community says we shouldn't do this, the plan is that that person who made the request will get the organization names that pass the test. Now, this is not an automated query, so someone cannot game the system by doing a million queries to kind of iterate and try to find out information that they shouldn't have. There's a person in the loop, so it'll be a slow process. If we see someone behaving suspiciously, we won't carry out the query. But we would be giving out the organization's email, that generic email, to queryers.
Yeah, that is the current intent. Yes, unless one of the things we are trying to be open about is as we go through this process, we are learning about what our best practices should be. We have an idea and we've come up with these processes for now. And as we continue to go through and we have researchers sending us questions and we are interfacing with data partner organizations, that may change, but for now, that is our intent. So, all right, let's see here. Our data profile was run. So now the final results are available in this zip file. And it is the zip file that you would send to us. So the zip file includes 4 things. I'm just going to show it to you very quickly. All right, so here was my output. Here you can see this is the data source name we created. There's a folder that looks like a date. This is the date of the CDM source release date. So we're trying to identify those different dates of release so we're not overwriting any data. And you can see here, there's the results This is just a distribution. Some of the concept counts we gathered had some distributed values. So that table structure is a little bit different than the data profile results itself. So it's just concept counts, just slightly different structure of a table. So that's why there's 2 files. There's the CDM source file. So this is the exact CDM source record coming from your database. And then this zip file is also going to include this metadata that you filled out. So if we open it up, you'll see this is the zip file, this is the unzipped data, and you can see all 4 files are here. And that is the information you'll be sending to the OHDSI Coordinating Center via SFTP. We are almost at the end of the hour, so I do have additional scripts that I will share around how to do your SFTP, but all of that will be available to you. And it is all up on GitHub as well.